who's from Town Hamlets, and we've also got Jonathan Mobley, who's from the East End Preservation Society. So next up is Jonathan.
Hi. So I think the first update is the planning, the development committee meeting, town development committee meeting that happened in September. This is the second planning meeting on the Trickle Brewery shopping mall complex. The first one was in April. And in September, the committee got back together again to consider the issues that we hoped that they would consider the issues that were important to us, which focus around community cohesion. In fact, it was a great disappointment. The committee, first of all, was minute. There were 3 people on the committee. This doesn't feel proper at all. Given that over 7,500 people voted to object, to have 3 people make a decision is quite wrong. They kept the focus of their consideration was kept very, very, very small. They only wanted to talk about essentially about the discount rent on the 10% affordable workplace in the scheme. They didn't want to talk about the broader implications of the scheme or the implications, for example, of the neighbourhood plan might have on the scheme. They didn't, in my view, they didn't really talk about community cohesion at all. Councillor Abdul Mukit was the chair of the committee, and I have to say he performed really, really well. He spoke out very impressively for the community and was clearly completely unconvinced by the officer's report. However, the other 2 councillors, Councillor Kevin Brady and Councillor Kahal Chowdhury, ignored all of the concerns, voted in favour of the planning application. So the vote was 2 against 1. If there had been 1 more person there, if there had been 2, if there had been 4 people and 2 had voted against, then Councillor Abdul Mukit's vote would have carried the decision against. So for the lack of 1 person at the meeting, the Trickle Brewery was approved. That 1 person could have been Councillor Lima Qureshi, who was, I believe she was isolating at the time. She has been on record to say that if she had been at the meeting, she would have voted against. So this was obviously a great disappointment to us, and we, in our view, completely wrong. And in fact, not only we've had Councillor Lima Qureshi and also Councillor Asma Islam, who's the Mayor's planning deputy, have said to us that they would support any moves going forward to challenge this decision. So the council, I feel the council in some ways knows that the decision was improperly made. It doesn't feel right to most people that 7,500 people's objections have been ignored like this. So going forward, we're looking at, we haven't given up, we're looking at 3 different options going forward. Well, 4 if you include changing the way the council works. But the three specific options on the council are potential to have it called in by City Khan, potential to have the decision called in by the Secretary of State, and the third option is the potential to make a legal challenge to the council. We're looking at all 3 of those options at the moment. And I think our focus at the moment is on a potential legal challenge, and there have been some exchanges of letters between ourselves and the council on this. I think that covers it. That makes up the day. Yeah. So, Farouk, do you want to?
Sorry, well, thank you for coming. I think it's good that you're here from the community. But I think with the current elections coming up, I think broader questions need to be asked, and we're asking yourselves as journalists to ask these questions. And looking at the broader picture, and the Trickle Brewery is, you could say, is the tip of the iceberg, but deep underneath is symbolic of what's happening in this area. It seems like Town Hamlets Council's policy as a council is, you could say, it's a de facto kleptocracy. Kleptocracy is ruled by theft, and it's based on displacing existing communities to maximize land values for property developers, so that the council could maximize tax revenue. So if you look at the local council tax or business rates, they're linked to the value of land. And what it appears is Tower Hamlets Council has deliberately embarked on a policy to maximise land revenue, land values, which only benefit developers and agents of developers, and we know who these agents are. I know there's been videos going around on social media. Unfortunately, a lot of those people are members of the Labour Party, and we need to ask questions within the Labour Party as to why these people are within our party, and also benefit council officers because of the tax revenue. And if you look at the Runnymede Trust, which is an independent think tank, they have said that Tower Hamlets is the most socially cleansed borough in all London boroughs. And what I mean by displacement is that in order to maximize land value, you have to move people out. So you can demolish buildings and you can maximize development there. What we're saying is this doesn't have to happen. You know, is the purpose of the council to serve the people, the residents, or is it to serve property developers and landowners? That's what it is. And we're asking yourselves as journalists to raise those questions in the upcoming election, because people will be coming, asking for support. And we need to move away from personality politics. We need to move away from politics based on personality, and we need to ask questions about their policies. There's no point putting someone else there if you're just going to carry on the same issues. And we're asking yourselves as journalists to actually raise those difficult questions and hold people to account. You know, there's only so much we as campaigners can do. But, you know, one of the functions of the London Borough Press Club is to be a voice for our community. And, you know, what is at stake is, if you look at the history of Bricklane, the reason why it's called Bricklane is over 1,000 years ago, the City of London, they didn't want certain trades within the City of London because they created a lot of pollution. So one of those trades was making bricks, and that's why they put it on the east of the City of London. So because the wind would blow it away, the wind always comes from the west. And for 1,000 years, this area has been a place for marginalized communities, for marginalized economic activities, from refugees from France, from Holland, the Huguenots, to Irish Catholics, Jewish community, and now the Bangladeshi Muslim community. And it's on our trust, you know, it's on our watch what we do with this trust. You know, there'll be people that will come after us who would need this space, who would need a place to make a new future. And are we going to be the people in history who basically gave this place away? And that's what's at stake. And I'm happy to field any questions on that.
So yes, I'm Dr. patronizing. I'm one of the co-founders and members of Nidra Manush. We set up Nidra Manush is set up by 10 young Bangladeshis. We set it up around the beginning of 2018. So we're a group of 10 Bangladeshis who come together, try and organise and mobilise around issues affecting the Bangladeshi community, not just in Tower Hamlets, but across other areas also. And I think one of the things I think it's important to emphasise is how this whole campaign itself has come about, because I think sometimes you're just seeing us at these meetings or on Channel S or on Mahi's show, you know, so, you know, it's good to give a bit of background of how we actually put together this campaign. So we've reached this point today now, following a lot of work on the ground, which involved, so when we say we collected, particularly the 550 signatures, those were collected by hand. We're going to people's homes around Bricklane, so on the estates. We're going, knocking on people's doors. We gave them leaflets on Safe Bricklane in English and in Bangla. Jetohan Farsi amra bujaisi Bangla, Jetohan amra shoke Farsi bujaisi bole olahan, this is what's happening at your doorstep. These are the consequences. So we try to explain the economics in Bengali and English. We try to explain the social elements, the cultural elements, the heritage, the environmental elements, and how that will then impact the community that is still living here. And that was about a 4-month process where all of us were splitting up. So some of us were on Chickstand Day, other people were by Balance Road, other people were towards this end, and others on the other end. And we spoke to people, and from speaking to people for months, we ended up collecting 550 signatures on paper. So this isn't just a petition, that we put online. This was physically talking to people at their doorsteps. Some of these conversations, in my case, I spoke to some people for half an hour. Some people we were talking for so long, they invited us into their homes. Some weren't so particularly friendly. But that's a part of building campaign, building the power with the community and for the community. And then also simultaneously, House of Aneta, just down the road on the other side of Princelet Street, we had two exhibitions that were set up. One was looking at this particular issue and the Truman Brewery's application and what was happening. And then the other exhibition was by Saif Osmani called Framing Bangladesh, looking at the history of sort of Bengalis in the area. And then we also had 3 rallies. I don't know if some of you, maybe you covered the rallies, you came to the rallies. We organised them. We had speakers who were residents, traders, we had councillors, we had local MPs, Bushnara Ali and Afsana Begum came forward and gave us their support. So I guess I wanted to emphasise sort of how we built this up from scratch. It's taken us a year and a half, I think, a year and a half. So this is where we are now, and we're hoping, as Prue has mentioned, that as journalists and especially having access to people who watch Channel S, ATN Bangla, they will be able to understand because I sometimes feel perhaps there's something lost in translation as well. And this is the beauty of this campaign, where we went around, and for some of us it became a language intensive course where we had to, I had to sometimes call up my dad saying, "Abba, how do you say this word in Bengali?" So for many of us, we learned, it became a practicing session for us. So I guess I wanted to emphasize how it's a very grassroots campaign we've built up from nothing, essentially, and we've built it up to this, where we've managed to bring so many local people on board, so many local people who have had concerns about the way they've been treated, the way they are being treated, and particularly one point I want to emphasize is, because people keep emphasizing that, but the Jewish community came and they left, the French Huguenots came and left, now it's the Bangladeshis' time to leave, which is fine, But what is different about what's happening now is that Bangladeshis aren't being given the choice, right? So this is being done through a socially coercive means of getting them out, right? So with the Jewish community, they the French Huguenots, they did what they needed to do, built up their businesses, and once they had a certain level of capital, they were able to move up, right? Migrate out of the East End. Whereas with Bangladeshis, what is happening? Bangladeshis aren't being given the opportunity to do that. What is happening is that they're having to coercively make the choice of, okay, well, we have to find something in Dagenham. I'm hearing so many Bengali families who are moving to Dagenham. I have a friend of mine who's just recently moved to Dagenham. People are moving to Barking. And those, who can afford to are moving to places like Bedbridge, Gans Hill. So I think, choice is an important element here to consider how the Bangladeshi community doesn't have that, and it's being socially cleansed from the area because for economic gains, which Paul has pointed out. Thank you.
Can I just add to that a little bit? The conversations Fatima was talking about, one of the things I found quite remarkable was that this wasn't a question of persuasion. We weren't persuading people to share our view. People already have this view. It was remarkable how many people understood the problem without us having to explain it. And the number of people who disagreed with us, I could count on one hand, I think. The consensus out there in the community is very strong. At the same time, there was also a slight sense of despair. What's the point of me getting involved? No one will listen to me, they don't listen. And I hope that we put a little bit of a spark into the community. That when you get together and you start having these conversations and work collectively, you can make a difference. We certainly believe so. And then also I wanted to add that we also had conversations, spent quite a lot of time on Bricklane itself, talking to the businesses and trying to understand the makeup of the businesses and to understand what makes Bricklane special. And we literally mapped out every single business, worked out what it is, what it does, is it independent or not, and that's a key one. And because that's one of the myths of Bricklanes, it's full of these independent businesses, and we've actually can say with great certainty that over 90% of them are really fiercely independent. And I mean, you can walk in and speak to the owner, that kind of independence. And that's a fragile ecosystem. And if people ask us why are we concerned about a shopping mall in the middle of Bricklane, it's the damage it can do to that ecosystem. It's not just a shopping mall or an office block, it's a corporate intervention. It's an intervention of big business and corporate style business into the middle of an area that just has managed to withhold that kind of pressure. And we're seeing it with True, we're seeing it at both ends of Bricklane. There are big developments happening at the Whitechapel end. In fact, the whole of Whitechapel is undergoing a huge amount of change, partly thanks to the council moving the town hall to Whitechapel. We've just been involved in a planning application on the corner of Whitechapel and Commercial Street, which amazingly the council defeated by a vote of 4-1. But this is an intervention, and I think the Trimber is part of this pattern is intervention of big city money into the East End, and this is where the coercion is coming from. And in our view, the council's job should be to resist this coercion rather than to welcome it in. And then at the top of Bricklane, a campaign I was working on last year, which is a huge one, is the Bishopsgate Goods Yard, which Sadiq Khan approved. In my view, I'm hoping that this development that was approved last year, which is a vast amount of office block and retail, I'm hoping that it's not going to go forwards because the office block is so inappropriate now in these times of COVID. But yesterday I was involved, an example of the problem is Box Park at the top of Bricklane by Shortridge Tube Station. Now Box Park have a planning application in right now to add another floor onto their scheme, and that floor will be basically a large drinking establishment. It's already a problem for local people, the amount of disruption caused by this. Originally it was supposed to be a retail scheme, but now it's largely an excuse for people to get very, very drunk, and they want to add an additional floor onto that. So yesterday I was imploring local residents to actually write to the council, I think in this case both Hackney and Tower Hamlets, to stop this happening. But that is an example of what's happening there with Box Park. Exactly the problem that we're going to see. It's not just about alcohol, it's about this kind of corporatised intervention. I mean, even in Box Park, the retail was supposed to be independent retailers. Every one of those is a big corporate brand in there. And that's exactly the kind of problem that we see escalating with a development like the True Brewery's proposed shopping mall development in the middle of Bricklane.
Yeah.
Okay, now I was just going to add how, so obviously when we speak in English about these issues, we're talking about things like social cleansing, housing issues, we're talking about gentrification. But one of the things I found in particular when I was on Chicksand Estate and all the other estates, Archdeacon House, when I was by Old Montague Street, when I went and covered some of the houses there, you know, and I spoke to lots of sort of sassas and sassies that are, you know, English mahasin in Bangla and they understand things like social cleansing. You know, how it's playing out, you know, how it impacts our community. They understand what gentrification is. So, you know, and that's one of the things we took back is that, you know, just because, you know, English they can't give you this elaborate explanation in English, that doesn't mean they don't understand what the issue is. And I think that's something we found very frustrating, particularly with particular officials, because of perceptions as well, you know, and let's call it what it is, you know, racist perceptions of the Bengali community, of the idea that, you know, English is the matter, English is the you are intellectual, you understand. But you know, what we learned, what I particularly took away from when I spoke to people is that no, Bangla you know, English, you know, so I think that was something that bothered me the most because I was seeing how people were speaking about the Bengali community, how they were saying, you know, oh, they don't always understand everything. And sometimes when we spoke to those assassins and sassies, they would always say, you know, oh, I'm not because because they feel like, you know, আমরা ইংলিশ মাথা চিনি না করি এটি মানুষ মনে করেন আমরা এটা বুঝি না আমরা কিতাও ইয়া যার আমরা যেমন কি বাবাত you know আমরা সারা জীবন কাটাইছি না you know so that was what a frustration I picked up is that this patronizing very paternalistic idea of the Bengali community and just seeing like you know elderly Bengalis who might not be able to express everything clearly and very elaborately in English that somehow they don't understand these issues. So I think that's something I'd love for you to take away and also emphasize because this came from officials as well. And I think the other thing I should point out, you know, we did offer an alternative community master plan. We put together a whole detail of how the Truman Brewery site could be used for the local community, which was never taken up. We had a meeting with Mayor John Biggs. We put it together, all of us from our different organisations. We brought in our skills, our expertise. We have people from Spitalfields Trust who have, decades of experience in planning. So they came, they looked at the document, so we had everything prepared. So no one can come to us and say, you're just shouting with no solution. When actually we did produce a whole document, which was rejected, and we produced this with people who have decades of experience in planning. So that's another thing that I think is important to point out, that we're not just screaming and shouting, we're providing things within using the sort of parameters of the law and how things work within planning, and we're giving that to you, but you're rejecting it, which then makes it look like, if I'm noise they're doing nothing, when that's not true. We had a private meeting with John Biggs, and we presented it and we put it together. So a lot of things have happened behind the scenes. So because people sometimes only see us when we're at the forefront, when we have the rallies, sometimes people aren't aware of the details of what's happening behind the scenes, particularly with officials who don't take it forward, which then looks like we're just causing nuisance, which we are. We are causing nuisance because this shouldn't be happening. So yeah.
So I just want to take up what Fatima said about the patronizing attitude by decision makers. This is the thing which I find quite disheartening is the powers that be at this council see the Bangladeshi community as children. So instead of dealing with the issues, they think just give them a few sweets and that will shut them up. Or they will send people, say, tell your people, find out what your people want and make them quiet. And that's been the story. Every time there's a serious issue that comes up, the powers that be, I'm not going to name any names, I don't want to be suspended again by the Labour Party. The powers that be would send sweets or distractions, like parents to switch the TV on. And that's what's been the response. And we saw that with the box bar and with Shoreditch High Street. They knew, I spoke to a professor at the LSE, who LSE Cities, they knew the adverse impact Shoreditch High Street was going to have to the Bangladeshi businesses in Bricklane. We take the footfall away. Instead of addressing that, what happened was they sent someone in to say, we just put a Bangla sign on Shoreditch High Street. Let's do a campaign for a Bangla sign. Instead of addressing that, there is no Bangla sign, it's a distraction. And what happened was Shoreditch High Street wasn't there for the businesses, it's there for the box park, retail park. That's what the main reason is, and it's had a detrimental effect. And that's the same thing we see with the Truman Brewery. What I find quite frustrating is when you have viable alternatives, decision makers, they will come with toys or distractions and say, let's put a painting up on a wall, or let's put some signs up. If there's no one here to read the signs, then who are the signs for? If there's no one here to understand the pictures, then who are the pictures for? So I'm asking you as journalists to actually ask those questions and not be taken in by these distractions and turn up with your cameras and take the pictures and add to this distraction, but actually question those things, because there is alternatives. So, I'm a Labour councillor. There is a Labour council in Preston. which is called the Preston model, where they looked at supporting independent business. Instead of maximizing land values, instead of building a shopping centre in the middle of Preston, the council leader said, no, we're going to do an alternative. And now that's a model. People from all over the world come and say, look, this is the model. He didn't have to drive the independent businesses away. He understood the value of the circular economy. So every pound that is spent in any of these independent businesses, 80p circulates in the local economy. But for every pound that's spent in Tesco, only 10p comes back into the local economy. So there are alternatives. But the issue is that, unfortunately, there is a lack of imagination in Tower Hamlets Council. There is a lack of imagination by people who have titles from Tower Hamlets Council. I don't know whether they have the power or not. That's something for you to ask. But there is an alternative. We have provided an alternative, and it doesn't have to be this way. This community doesn't have to be consigned to the footnote of history. It's a living community. Heritage is not just bricks and mortar; it's people as well. When I spoke at the council, I reminded Councillor Chunu when we campaigned together about the community language service, and Chunu said that there are 3 Bengals: there's East Bengal, West Bengal, and there's Bricklane. We've lost the community language service. Let's not lose Bricklane, and we're asking you to help us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I mean, before we go to questions, I just wanted to say that in your press pack, you'll see that the last 3 pages hold a lot of quite complex initial data gathering. This has been collected over the last month by students from master's students from urban design from the University of Sheffield, and what they're doing is they're collecting their own data, which is both on retail, everyday urbanism, and heritage as well, with a particular focus on Bangalore and how ethnic minorities within a particular context, like in Spitalfields, see their culture and heritage. Now, we think this is really, really crucial because we're making some new grounds as well here, because the council and other authorities might hold this information, but they're certainly not sharing it with the community. So we're, over the next few months up until March, end of March, we're hoping that there will be more data that will be released online for the public to use, so that we empower our community so that we can come up with a viable alternative plan. We also have a few other events coming up, which is a fundraising initiative. So far we've raised £10,000, thankfully from the generous donation from the public. They've given us £10,000 towards the legal case, but we'll be continuing that in the new year because we want to take it further. And we'll also be holding a conference, a large conference, which will be led by academics, locals and campaigners, which will be looking at what the key learnings have been from the Truman Brewery site development. So that's expected in February 2022. So we welcome you to join us then as well at the conference, which will be held locally. So, any more from anyone in the panel? So we can go into questions if anyone has any questions.
Is it definitive that you'll be raising the legal challenge? Is there 3 options? So you've decided on the 3rd option?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're taking legal advice on that, yeah. We're looking, we haven't, it's not, they're not exclusive options, we can pursue all 3 of them.
Oh, at the same time.
The 3 ways or 3 options, like London Mayor, the government, and 3rd one is legal option or taking them legally. The local authority is responsible for, the council is responsible for making a decision or process. What does John Biggs say? What is his opinion? I know he's got cabinets and committees, and what is his opinion?
It's a good question. I've been campaigning for 18 years now on ethnic minority spaces, from Queen's Market and Upton Park to all the way here, and he's never properly responded by email to give his opinion. So I've always been circumspect as to who he's serving in particular. If you look at the communities who vote him in, the Bangladeshi community do predominantly vote him in. So we have to ask ourselves whether he is serving, whether these politicians are serving the very community that vote them in. And at the moment, they're pushing us out. The initial data from the students is saying that the group that's being pushed out is the Bangladeshis from the Pacific of Bangladesh. We have to ask ourselves why that is, and why John Biggs is not saying anything explicitly about that.
Could it be a political issue? Then if we remember the issues with crossfade earlier in the century, like 2003, 4, I guess, or 5, that campaign here, not to dig a shaft, and that was a big political issue. I mean, the political pressure has, won the, fund, because, George Fellow was here. He made it a big issue.
Yes.
And he got elected, and for whatever reason, that shaft they didn't bring, take the shaft here. But with it being elections coming here in May, do you think that could be an issue, or there are candidates who is standing against John? Think that your campaign has any relationship with these things, or could you be? I know there is a Labour councillor, but can you capitalize on this? How would you do it?
I think it's important for us to actually raise the issues. So at the moment, unfortunately, Taham's politics is equivalent of two bald men fighting over a comb. It might be entertaining for some people, but we need to talk about the issues instead of talking about the personalities. At the moment, you're hearing this person has done this and this person has done that. We need to say, look, these are the issues in Tahamas are facing. We have a council that's deliberately, the entire policy is based on displacement. The entire focus of the council, if you look at what's happening on the Isle of Dogs, they call them opportunity areas. It's city fringe opportunity areas, and now they make the Whitechapel an opportunity area. What that means is that's an invitation for developers to come in and move people out, move existing people out to maximize the land value. That's the only way you could maximize the land value. There has to be an alternative. We need to ask the issue. It doesn't matter who it is. You could have Tom or Harry there. You're just giving the names. But if the policies are the same, the outcomes are going to be the same. So if we raise those issues, then the politicians have to respond. It's not just the male candidates, but also the councillors as well.
Yeah, but the power of the ballot is more stronger than the policy.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's up the job. That's what we're asking for yourselves as journalists, to actually raise this issue that displacement. Let's be frank with what it is. Displacement is happening. It's not something that we made up. The Runnymede Trust has written a letter to Tower Hamlets Council saying that displacement is happening. Is it the function of the council to look after the residents and the businesses, or to look up or to maximize land values for investors abroad? What is the function of Tower Hamlets Council?
yeah, this lady says that people are not stupid. And people may not speak English in the door, but they understand the problem. So if the politicians, whoever it is, whether Labour or independent or anybody, could go into the door and make it an issue, they understand that they are going to be kicked out of this area. And if they can make that issue, whether it's John or somebody else, that's my point, rather than
I think that, but I think it's, but that's what people think. They think politics works like that. Unfortunately, what's happened is across the East End, there's been cleansing going on. You see across Hackney, Newham, and Tower Hamlets in particular, where land values have gone up, people have been pushed down. Here is a classic example of what's going on. In other areas such as Newham, you see the same. If you look at the Carpenter's estate, they wanted to do that. And what we don't have is we don't have the agency or the leverage of certain communities to be able to go with a full frontal and say to the council, hang on a minute, we're here to stay, we're embedded communities, we're EastEnders, we're here to stay. They don't care. I think there's something we need to, the planning system no longer cares for the people it's serving. What it's caring for is large scale developers and hedge fund owners or whatever it is making money abroad. Now that's economy coming out, as we said, that's not circular, that's not returning back into the community. What's happening is going abroad. So I don't think that system is presently working, and the trickle down effect of capitalism isn't working here very well. You know, every time a couple of times I've spoken to politicians and elected representatives, I've said that the trickle down effect isn't working. Opportunities aren't reaching communities. They're not reaching our communities, certainly in the same way they think they are reaching them. So I think here the big movement is that planning system is so old and it needs changing. It needs massive changes because, you know, World War II has happened. Ethnic minorities have come in. We fought in World War II. Our ancestors have done. Now, acknowledge us in your city or don't, or tell us that you're not going to acknowledge us. You know, we made the West just as much as everybody else did, you know?
Can I just, I mean, with regards to your question around politicians and making it an issue, it's also to do with, because if there's one thing I have learned on this campaign, you know, I mean, I'm a sociologist, I'm a trained sociologist, so I also observe. I observe people, I look at how people, you know, socially, how things are changing. And what's been really interesting to observe is how politicians, you know, Bangladeshi or otherwise here in Hamlets, so much of it, you know, I now understand why people call it dirty. It's such a dirty world. And that's why at Nijor Manush we have a policy where we try and avoid politicians wherever possible. This is why for us it's about organising people and building the pressure from the people, because that's how you hold these people accountable. And if there's one thing I learned was that some of these officials that we met on this journey, again, I'm not going to name anyone, but you know, some of the Bengali ones would say things like, you know, so you know, behind closed doors, they're telling us they support us, but then they say, you know, oh, but we can't make it public that we're supporting you. And I've challenged these politicians. I said, you know, why this is empty rhetoric. This is literally what politicians do, is empty rhetoric. And then, you know, we got that from a few people who just always say to us, you know, you know, look at the pictures we have on this wall, you know, looking at the, you know, anti-racist protesters, you know, people are so quick to use these examples of how, you know, Bengalis came onto the streets, they fought, you know, they didn't take nonsense from anyone. And these politicians do that. But then they're like, you know, but then when they're in the council, it's like they're not doing anything. You know, they're not out there sort of saying that actually this is what's happening, this is why this campaign has gained momentum, because of the fact that this is what we're not delivering to them. So for me, it's about how sort of two-faced a lot of these politicians are, especially the Bangladeshi politicians, because they know, first of all, they can use the language, you know, to tap into a particular way of speaking and trying to charm the community. So I think, you know, those are the things I've learned, is that, you know, people will only make an issue of it if they actually genuinely are invested in the people, in the community. And you only have a handful of those who do that. And those who aren't, you know, just look at what they do. Their work, where they are, what they do, what they vote on, what they don't vote on, which meetings are they at, that already tells you where they stand. So I think it's also about, you know, the political will of the politicians to recognize that, you know what, this is an issue, I'm not creating a huge problem, I'm not, you know, let's raise this issue, but they won't. So I think,
Yeah, we should go after politicians. Just before the last things, I mean, I've just been reading, you know, some of the old, do you have the alternative proposal you made, a copy of the alternative proposal you made? Can you send us an alternative proposal? And, or is that the alternative, some of the alternative proposals, like number 1, rent increases, social cleansing, you know, in the bottom I can see the bold things. Is that your alternative proposal, or?
I think, I mean, these are our alternative suggestions we put forward. sorry, but are you asking about the community-led master plan we put together?
Yeah, well, against
Well,
those,
it's pretty
yeah.
much this, but in just a lot more detail. Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
pretty much these key points are the points that we've raised in the other document, but it's just a lot more details of how,
Yeah.
when, who. It's just a lot more expansive. That's all it is.
It goes into things like, you know, if you look at the whole site, where how to open it up, make it more accessible to people. If you were going to consider housing, where would it be appropriate to put housing on the site? And actually, the most appropriate place to put housing is exactly where they're proposing to put this shopping mall.
Yeah, see, the thing is that if you make, okay, of course, alternative proposal, but for example, blocks of flats or something, okay, if we build blocks of flat, we want 10% or 20% for the local residents and everything.
Well, it should be 50%. I mean, in a borough like that, it should be 50 or more. And we should be fighting for that because that's the local need. And the whole point of planning is that it returns that to people. But at the moment, all the money generated is going directly to developers. So developers are making millions while locals are being pushed out. But it's the local economy that's actually made the area stay buoyant economically. So actually, in fact, you could say that the Bangladeshi community is being used by the planning process. So if you look at an alternative plan, there's been other alternative plans across London, and they are being adopted. The one we're looking at, we're due to kind of release actually massive, talk more about it and enhance it for the February conference. So the February conference in February 2022, we want to make sure that's a truly inclusive one, which includes the Bangladeshi community at the heart of it. So planning puts people at the heart of how they're developing. It's not just a case of retail shopping offers just for tourists. You know, tourists don't make Bricklane. The people make Bricklane. It's always been the case.
Sorry, the fact that it's, let's say,
Do you know if
Yes.
they have already started the work?
No, they haven't started the work yet.
That this is about the election year. What is useful, I guess, about it being an election? I'd rather do the election year every year, frankly, so that it's always relevant. But what is useful about the election year, regardless of the individual politicians or the parties, is now is a good time to be having these conversations. Now is the opportunity to actually open up these debates and raise issues, and it should be about the issues. And one of those examples I've mentioned, possibly looking at how we go about planning, possible planning reform issues. It is a double-edged sword, because the thing we've got to watch out for at the moment is there is a lot of talk in national government levels about planning reform, and none of it goes our way. It's all going to push into the direction of more free market economics, allowing developers to do what they want. There is a movement circulating around